Hey guys, how you doing? Derby here, and today I want to talk about the predictability of Leviathan Extreme Mode. Still, to this day, I find people in the party finder groups who keep saying, sorry, never saw splash, or sorry, I never rotate the camera fast enough. Now, this may seem like a valid excuse for Leviathan Extreme Mode, but it really isn't. Each of its patterns is extremely predictable. It is possible to foresee every charge and slam before it even happens through pure observation and just learning the patterns. There is little to no RNG in the fight, and I'll be showing you the patterns and what to exactly watch out for, so you're no longer swinging your camera all over the place and worrying whenever you're doing Leviathan. So let's start from the beginning of the fight. As you can see, you're in a four-sided boat, which is rather obvious. Let's name these four sides as they are on the compass. Going clockwise, Leviathan's head is north, then we have east, south, which is currently not visible, and then west. At 80%, Leviathan will then start doing his charge and his slams. The first slam will always come from the west. Look at how I've positioned my camera. It is so I'm mainly looking west so I can exactly see where the slam comes from. In this case, the slam was on the northern side of the western wall, so now we're running south, to avoid the slam obviously. Remember, in the first stage of the fight, the slam is always going to be on the western wall. You do not need to run that far to avoid the slams whatsoever. As long as you're around the edges of the inner circle, you will not get knocked off the platform, which will happen in the later stages, but we'll go into that into more detail when we actually get there. The head will always spawn exactly where you saw the splash for the slam, so main tanks can always position themselves to always end up in the head, in this case in the west, while the off-tank and the melee DPS can always go to the opposite side, the east, to end up next to the tail. The fight from here is pretty much set in stone, as we can now see the tail. The tail is the most important element in the Leviathan Extreme Mode. Now let's skip forward to the first double charge and slam. So, the tail is on the eastern side, and the head is on the west. The first charge will always come from either side of the head, in this case the west or the north. If the head is west, the first charge will never come from the eastern side. So as you can see, the charge came from the northern side. The second charge is always on the opposite adjacent side to where Leviathan's head is. In this case, the second charge will always be south or east. So what you'll want to do is flip your camera around 180 degrees from this spot. So now you're facing where Leviathan charged to, and now you can see both the south and the eastern walls. Leviathan will now do his second charge, and you can easily see where both of the two charges will be coming from. And now we'll get the slam, and this slam is the easiest thing to predict. Remember the position of the tail? Well, if you don't, it was east. The slam will always be on the side where the tail once was, so in this case, it will be on the east. The head will now spawn where the tail once was, like what we saw in the previous phase, and the tail will then be on the opposite side. This pattern repeats and repeats, and it carries on all throughout the fight. The pattern will never ever change. So now let's skip to another double charge and slam phase, so you can see all the different slams and charges, and as you can see, the pattern will always remain the same every single time. Let's see another example for some practice. So if we use the rule above, the first charge should either come from the north or the west, and it came from the west. Now we're going to flip our camera around to see the charge from the opposite direction, and as you can see, it then came from the east. And now we have the splash, which of course is on the western side, as that's where the tail was. This rule only applies if we're facing north when fighting Leviathan, like how it is on the first stage and later on in the fight. And as you can see in the two examples I showed you, we were facing north. Now this one's a bit more interesting. We're fighting Leviathan facing south. The tail was east and the head is west. Instead of the first charge coming from the sides adjacent to the head, now it's based on the tail as we're facing south. And as you can see, the first charge is going to come from the east, not the west like it would have before if we were facing north. So when we're facing south, the first charge instead would come from the east and the south. so it's basically opposite of what we had before when we were facing north. The rule for the second charge, however, is the same, where the charge is always going to be coming from the two opposite sides where the first charge would have came from. In this instance, after we flipped our camera, the second charge will come from the south or the east. The rule for the slam, however, always remains the same, in that it always comes from the side of the tail. So in this instance, the slam is going to be on the east. Now, of course, the fight isn't that easy, is it? And it can't be that predictable, right? Well, the only difference is post-tidal wave. Tidal wave is Leviathan's limit break almost, which breaks all the fencing around the arena. After this, Leviathan's patterns change slightly. At the beginning of the video, I did say that the tail is the most important part of the fight. Well, now you're about to see why. No matter if we're facing north or south to fight Leviathan, the first charge from this point on will always come from two adjacent sides of the tail. I'll show you two clips now, one when we're facing south and the other when we're facing north. The first clip will be when we're facing north. Like always, we'll position ourselves so we can see the charges from the two sides where the tail meets. The first charge should come from the north or the west, and as we can see, it comes from the west. The second charge is always going to be opposite, so we'll now turn the camera around so we can see the south and east. Then we'll have the slam, which of course will come from the west, as that's where the tail was. Now let's look at the example where we're facing south. The tail is west and the head is east, so the first charge will come from either the west or the south. Then we'll look to the opposite side, where it will come from either the east or the north. Now the slam will follow, and as the tail was west, the slam will come from the west. And that's Leviathan's charges in a bubble. The fight is really this easy, and eventually, once you've got the patterns in your head, you will never have to think twice or panic each time you're in Leviathan Extreme Mode. If you have any other questions about the fight, please do post them in the comment section, as this is not a Leviathan EX guide, but rather a tips and tricks to show you guys how to predict the charges. And that concludes this video, so hopefully you guys have learned something new regarding Leviathan Extreme Mode. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.